Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I'm speaking with Abhishek Mundra. He is a practice director at Everest Group in their enterprise services practice. He tracks enterprise tech vendors, the broader tech software market, and provides advisory services. He's also the lead author on a new Dynamics 365 services assessment using Everest Group's Peak Matrix. The findings of that assessment caught my attention because they offer an outside view of how Microsoft partners are delivering Dynamics 365 solutions, both in terms of how some of them compare and how the Microsoft channel compares to its competitors to an extent. Abhishek's viewpoint is also interesting to me because it is separate from Microsoft or from any one service provider, so it's a nice outside viewpoint for me and hopefully for you too. We discussed some of the key themes of the report, including the impact of industry specialization and customer satisfaction metrics, as well as guidance for customers on how to develop strategies for investing in a solution and for selecting a partner. All right, well, Abhishek Mundra, thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jason, for inviting me.
I'm really interested to learn more about your work, some of the findings of your recent report, and so I thought we could just get into it. Maybe we could just start by having you give a bit of an introduction, the role you have, the organization you're with, and the kind of work that you do.
So, hi, I'm Abhishek. I'm a practice director with Everest Group. I'm aligned to the enterprise platform services practice. So, in my present role, I track the enterprise platforms market across the tech vendors as well as the service providers. We have a year-long publishing agenda, where we track the specific elements of the broader market. Apart from that, I also advise clients, large IT service providers, tech vendors around their go-to-market strategy and pricing strategy.
And it's great to have you here. And what really led me to ask you to join us was obviously the most recent report that you published and authored on the Dynamics 365 enterprise services space and some of the findings in that and some of the themes in that. So I'm really looking forward to getting some of your views there. Maybe we could just start by you could give an overview of the report itself, what it is, what it isn't, perhaps, who consumes it, maybe a bit of the history if you've published multiple rounds of it.
Basically, the report that we are talking about, it's a peak matrix assessment for the services market in Microsoft Dynamics 365. So peak matrix is a proprietary assessment framework that we have at Everest Group. We do around about close to 60-70 peak assessments in different services and tech vendor markets throughout the year across IT and business processes. So if you were to think of this peak matrix, it's basically a 2x2 matrix with the x-axis talking about the innovation and investments that are being made by the service providers and the tech vendor. On the y-axis, you have the kind of market traction that some of these participants are gaining in the market. And the final result of it is essentially a relative ranking of different participants that are operating in this particular ecosystem. So that's a brief about this. And we have done this for Dynamics 365. Earlier this year, we did the same thing for S/4HANA services. And before that, we have done it for ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday ecosystems as well.
And yeah, so I assume the ideal audience for a report like this would be a CIO or someone of that who's looking to make a major investment in services around one of these types of solutions. They're trying to evaluate their consulting relationship options, and this gives them your views on how you sort of analyze and quantify some of the factors on around some of these of the largest, I would say, GSIs.
A majority of our reader base is actually the enterprise audience. And apart from, just these reports, we closely work with some of these large enterprises in helping them, guiding their decision-making process, while doing the vendor selection across tech as well as service providers. So yeah, you're right.
There's the sort of an analytical side of evaluating the vendors. And then part of that is also talking to some of these customers of theirs, right? And that's part of the report. And I assume that's part of maybe some of your work throughout the year in evaluating sort of what the outcomes are on some of these, with some of these relationships.
We follow a very, very comprehensive, approach while doing this assessment. We start off with, getting primary inputs from the various market participants that we are evaluating. So, we typically invite 40 to 50 players, ask for their inputs in terms of, what they are doing in the market. We have a formal RFP, that we have as a part of this assessment. And then, based on the kind of responses that we get and the kind of value that some of these providers are able to deliver, based on that, we finally, decide that, okay, these will be the 18 or 20 players that we will, have on our report. So that's from a supply side. Now, from a demand side, what we do is, as you said, we have a year-round interaction with all the enterprises, right? We get to hear their queries around platform comparison, their specific challenges with a specific platform and with a specific service provider delivering services. So that's one. Second, we ask service providers to share some of these some references with us. So each service provider typically shares 4 to 5 references, wherein we have a one-on-one conversation, a 30-40 minute conversation directly with the key stakeholder, from the enterprise, and where we try to understand their key challenges from the ecosystem, key expectations that they have from the tech vendor and the service provider.
I'd love to dive into some of the observations, the themes of the latest report. There are findings in there that I think will really help our audience sort of understand how you view and what your findings are in this space. So maybe let's start at the top. Are there top level findings about enterprise adoption, about the services for around the sort of Dynamics 365 suite that you would highlight?
So, just talking specifically about Dynamics, right? So we did a similar sort of assessment 2 years back, right? When we were doing it as a part of cloud ERP services, and Dynamics 365 was one of the vendor that was covered under that broader umbrella, right? At that time, Dynamics 365 was not very mature, and I think it was just the second year of inception or second or third year in between when Dynamics 365 the offering was there in the market. Cut to, if it's see today, right? The growth journey has been tremendous. Right now Dynamics is almost a $3+ billion run rate, and growing at around 35-40% in terms of their product business. So that has been phenomenal, and that's what prompted us to do a very, very specific assessment, in this area, because there are interesting demand themes that we see in the market, specifically around Dynamics 365 and the kind of customers who are adopting this. So to start off with, I like to highlight three broad trends in this market, right? So the first one, is around in terms of the kind of outcome that enterprises are expecting out of their Dynamics 365 implementation. So earlier, 2-3 years back, it was just about implementing a CRM system or implementing an HCM system. Right now, the consumption of Dynamics 365 is driven more around specific processes. So enhancing the UI UX, having faster time to market, improving the field service operations. So those are some of the common themes, that we see around the adoption of Dynamics 365 and the reasons why people, while enterprises are adopting, Dynamics 365 as a solution. So that's one. Second thing, that we see in terms of, specific market themes in Dynamics 365 is around the focus on real-time analytics and automation. So there is a lot of focus on evolving processes, as I said in my first point, and that is being enabled by integrating some of these, siloed systems together through the Power Platform and the Dataverse together, and creating that end-to-end view, which is based on strong analytics capabilities. So that is second a strong theme that we see in this market. And the third thing that is interesting to see is there is a specific enterprise segment group that is more bullish on Dynamics 365. So typically enterprises who are investing into Azure as a cloud offering, or the small and medium enterprises who for whom some of the other big vendors offering the likes of SAP and Oracle are too heavy for them to implement and they are looking for faster time to market. Those are the enterprises who are typically adopting Dynamics 365. And if I compare Dynamics 365 with some of the other platform markets, so be it SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, ServiceNow. So Dynamics has a very strong portion of their revenue, or coming in from that mid segment of enterprises who are adopting it for faster time to market. So those are the three key things that I'm seeing.
That last point was one that I had read from your findings already before we talked, and it's one that I've been thinking about leading up to this conversation, because it's always, in various reports and various remarks I've heard from different analysts over time, over many years at this point, the sort of the critique or the observation, maybe it's just an observation, that Microsoft Dynamics, especially on the ERP side in the enterprise space, does not gain a lot of market share, or is not even sort of considered or selected really very often, and that it remains a low percentage of either maybe Microsoft's own customer base by percentage, or how its win rate in the market overall at the enterprise level remains low. And that observation you've sort of what you've signaled here sounds very similar to that. And I just wonder, what motivates them to keep competing in this space, because my sense is that they continue to fight very hard for those large enterprise opportunities. And I don't have the vision of exactly how many of those they win. I assume they win some, but it sounds from what you're saying, the SAP and Oracle type vendors, and I say type, but I mean those are probably the primary two, and maybe a couple others, maybe are winning still much more at the enterprise level, on the finance and supply chain ERP level. Would you agree?
Typically, for enterprises like who don't want all the functionalities that are being offered by SAP and Oracle, and they want a light version for their finance and the CRM related systems. So those are typically the ones who are preferring Dynamics. And the interesting thing is, right, some of these enterprises, and I've been part of a few of these conversations wherein they had already adopted, a system like a Salesforce or a Workday. Now they are thinking to transition away from these systems to Dynamics 365. So Dynamics 365 is doing a good job in terms of, some of these specific elements around faster time to market, better integration within the Microsoft ecosystem, and in some parts outside it as well. And it is making it really affordable for these mid-sized enterprises to adopt Dynamics 365, vis-a-vis some of the others like Salesforce and Workday. So yeah, that's there. But yeah, for the large enterprise, still the functionalities that the product has need to mature a lot, to cater to their specific demand theme.
Yeah, I mean, I've read about, some of the biggest SAP wins and stories in that space at various times. And it seems like what often wins them these massive deals at huge global enterprises is that the teams at these large organizations, they want a full-scale, all-encompassing solution that is all under that one all SAP solution, or an all Oracle financial, based solution. And Dynamics just does not offer quite that. You would have to bring in ISVs, you would have to do maybe some more custom development. Although SAP, you have to do huge amounts of custom development, right? I don't know. Is that your observation, or are there other factors at play too?
I agree, to this observation that around, how this adoption theme is panning out. But, I would also like to highlight is that, a lot of the consumption pattern on the large enterprise side as well, is changing. While 3-4 years back, the way you said, right, the owner of the CIO or the CHRO, whoever is owning the initiative, they would want to look into a platform that is able to scale across their functional areas. So if they are doing it for ERP, they are also thinking that whether or not the solution can do it for HCM or our CRM systems. While that has changed a lot, right? Today it is entirely a functional driven. So if a CHRO is governing the decision making around their cloud HCM solution, so they are doing it very independently. So while the organization may be running it on Oracle or a SAP, they may end up doing it on a Workday. So that's also changing, and therein I feel that some of these smaller vendors, they are who are scaling up at a very fast pace. The likes of Dynamics and even some of the other cloud-based solutions. So they are finding their white spaces in this larger enterprise ecosystem. And I think Dynamics is one of them, especially on the services and the sales side of the ecosystem, and not much on the finance and operations.
Another area that I know that you looked at in the report was industry specializations, right? Can you talk about any trends in that area?
So I think one thing that is interestingly that is happening in the overall enterprise platform ecosystem, right, is in terms of this increasing importance of industry specificity, right? So few years back, while the core focus of the value creation by the service providers was around how fast we can implement, or how best we can implement this particular solution. Right now, that value creation level has transformed from some of the horizontal and automation related IPs that service providers used to bring in earlier. Now it is completely focused on vertical specific IPs and solutions. So that is interesting thing that is happening. And now coming to industry specific adoption of Dynamics 365, right? So in terms of the major industries where we are seeing a high volume of deal activity. So in terms of volume of engagements, retail and manufacturing is leading the industry. We are seeing a lot of new engagements coming up in these two industries. But having said that, while when we talk about the size of the engagement, the deal sizes, still BFSI, public sector are the ones where we see some of the larger size deals. So that's one observation. And second, is around the public cloud deployment model, right? Not all industries are that fairly mature in terms of adopting a public cloud based solution. So that is also that we are seeing in some of the adoption trends for Dynamics 365 as well in industries such as energy and utilities, and even to some extent for manufacturing as well. So those will be the key themes that I would like to highlight.
And when you talk about the sort of the still relatively new model of public cloud deployment, I'm sorry, maybe I missed this, but were there other particular industries in the ones you mentioned where uptake of a public cloud deployment is still less common, or where organizations are still more hesitant?
I think in my experience, most of the industries, as I said, right, specifically in industries such as energy, utilities, manufacturing, and to some extent, banking, enterprises. So these are the industries, who are still hesitant to adopt the public cloud solution from an enterprise application perspective. Because if you will understand, right, the large part of their existing ecosystem is still on premise, and it's uphill task for them to, do the kind of change management that is required to adopt a public cloud solution. So yeah, those will be the key industries.
One of the things that is in the report itself that I thought was interesting was the way you actually sort of break down different characteristics of service providers. And, I speak to quite a few service providers, and just a lot of the people that I speak with in the Microsoft space work for a partner in some respect, whether it's as a consultant out in the field, or a manager executive type, or with a vendor that is focused on solution development and selling solutions rather than services. But I see sort of all flavors of that, I guess. How do you sort of look at the different types of service providers out there? How did you break those down in the new report? What characteristics do you call out for the readers?
Any of our peak assessment, the end output of the relative ranking is that we end up creating 3 broad clusters of the market participants. One is the leaders, second is the major contenders, and third is the aspirants. So talking first about the leaders in the market, right? So interesting thing, that we are seeing in the Dynamics 365 market is around, and this is not very specific to Dynamics 365, also valid for some of the other hyper growth platform areas such as ServiceNow and Salesforce. We are increasingly seeing a lot of these specialist service providers who are focused on just a single platform. They are gaining a lot of traction in the market. if you see this report as well, there are a couple of providers such as HSO, Hitachi, who are, doing specifically Dynamics 365. So those guys are gaining, attraction in the market by the virtue of their ability to, keep a track of the tech vendor innovation and being, at par with the, innovation curve of the tech vendor. Because, for a platform that is growing 40% year on year, the service providers need to really be thinking, alongside the product roadmap and building their capabilities alongside that. And in some of the, the big SIs do struggle, in that aspect, and that we are seeing as a common theme across some of our emerging platform areas. So that's one new thing that we saw. In terms of typical leader characteristics, and in this report we ended up recognizing Accenture, HCL, Hitachi, Infosys as key leaders in the market. Typical characteristics that we saw in these service providers is their ability to deliver large scale, multi-continent, end-to-end services for Dynamics 365. As the ecosystem of this product is evolving, enterprises are now demanding more of consulting services, which some of these providers are able to deliver in terms of providing that their thought leadership, providing that strategic support of thinking around their Dynamics 365 engagement. So that's one of the characteristics. Second is around their ability to create industry specific transformational cases. They're building specific solutions for few of the industries that they are targeting, which is helping enterprises to scale up fast and get a good time to market with respect to their implementations. And finally their ability to cater to the talent needs of the industry. So their ability to quickly scale up the talent, at par with the demand. So I think that's also something that is differentiating them in the market.
I have a couple of follow-up questions on this because as I looked at sort of as you said, the three sort of categories, broad categories that you classified the vendors that were evaluated in this report, some of them I very much expected, some of the ones in the leader category, for example, and some of the ones who you consider major contenders. There are others, though, where I had no idea they were even involved in the Dynamics 365, space. And even as Microsoft partners, they're just companies that maybe I knew of them. There's some that are big SIs, global SIs, but I've never seen their name come up as Microsoft partners, even, or any kind of Dynamics 365 notoriety or big wins or, any publicity that Microsoft gives them. And it's possible I certainly can miss things, especially if they're not, especially if they're focused in other parts of the world, primarily in Asia, for example, maybe I'm missing it or something like that. But really, I was surprised about at least, I would say, I'm just looking at the list here, like 4, at least like 4, maybe 5 of them where I said, wow, I had no idea that they were even up for consideration. What do you think about that? Are they, am I just maybe not looking in the right places?
In terms of, the level of traction or the level of, the market activity that is around the partner ecosystem for Dynamics, I think when we compare it to some of the other platform vendors like that of Salesforce, ServiceNow, or SAP on Oracle, I think definitely it's, the volume of activity and the volume of noise is really less. And that is a lot to do with Dynamics 365 as an offering fairly new in the market, or as a cloud offering fairly new in the market. So maybe that's one reason you would not have heard a lot of these names. But I think Microsoft do have a lot of awards around the kind of innovation that is being delivered on Dynamics 365, and they end up recognizing a lot of these vendors. So yeah, they are doing. But I think, as you pointed out, there is a opportunity to scale up, right, in terms of their investments into the partner community, especially the kind of activity that we are seeing in some of the other ecosystems. For example, SAP. I think, over there, Microsoft can really scale up their partner investments.
Another thing you mentioned was talent. And I think that's one of the topics that is always a concern for system integrators, especially Microsoft partners, and you hear this a lot in the dynamic space, kind of keeping, retaining, and nurturing talent, especially as you said, as all these products evolve so quickly and that the skills required to implement the latest changes. Did you measure that at all? Did you ask about it with either with customers or trying to measure it with the service providers themselves?
Yes. Talent is a very, very important, parameter for us to evaluate, and we evaluate talent on, many different fronts, right? A is in terms of, the static talent, wherein we try to understand what is the kind of scale and the kind of certifications, that service providers are investing into. So that's one. Second, we also look into the diversity of these certifications, how well it is spread across some of the existing as well as niche product areas. And thirdly, like, we also talk to enterprises and get to understand talent management as an area, like what is their level of satisfaction from talent management, right? Wherein we, try to ascertain, how well service provider was able to manage attrition and provide the right expertise. So, what we see in this market, from a static analysis point of view, is around the investments in emerging areas, are not growing at par with the product growth. So, some of the emerging product areas for Dynamics and some of the emerging technology areas around AI, IoT. So, therein, a lot of talent investments are lacking by the service provider community, and they would probably want to ramp up their talent investments. Secondly, on a talent management front, there are two key issues, that were pointed out repeatedly. One is around the ability to manage attrition. So that's a key issue. Second is around their ability to provide functional and industry specific talent. And, so you can provide a certified talent, but if that talent does not understand nuances of a telecom industry and a supply chain process, so there is a very steep learning curve that is involved, and enterprises, and it ends up creating a lot of problem for enterprises to manage that learning curve. So I think those are the two key areas.
What about customer satisfaction? That must be another area that you do some measurement on when you're evaluating a vendor and their clients. How is it? What are the challenges there that you've identified?
So when we look at customer satisfaction, is not just an overall score, that we ask for. We have multiple dimensions of evaluation. So, to start off with, their technical expertise, domain expertise, as I said, around talent management, the kind of portfolio coverage that the service provider was able to provide, then around pricing, commercial flexibility, account management, OCM capabilities, and emerging tech capabilities. So these were the common dimensions, that we evaluated for this assessment. So if I look at, at an overall level, from a services perspective, the overall satisfaction was good. However, there were few areas where there's a scope of improvement. So, around talent management, there is a gap in the market, as I said, in emerging tech capability areas, wherein new talent is needed, and the talent is not able to scale up, as fast. Second is around the organizational change management capabilities. So so we end up hearing a lot from suppliers, around their investment into OCM and how they're enabling all of these things. But cut to when we actually talk to enterprises in terms of understanding what was the OCM intervention that suppliers ended up doing, we rarely get to hear meaningful stories around OCM. So I think that's another area wherein suppliers need to meaningfully invest in order to keep up with enterprise expectations.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it just makes me think also, we've seen from my side, vendors that specialize in solutions that support OCM seem to be pushing into this market a little more, who may have been focused elsewhere. So I wonder if, they're seeing signals too, that some of these solution providers, that there is that need, and that there is that need to engage with the service providers with more focused capabilities to support that? Because I sense that that is one of those growing trends in this space, that maybe it's not keeping up with other vendors and other types of solutions.
Yes, definitely. So we see a lot of intervention of these specialist, companies who are just focused on OCM and training. Enterprises outsourcing their OCM part to some of these enterprises, and who have a more local presence and a good and better understanding of the enterprise context. So typically it's going to them. In Dynamics 365, we saw a lot of the OCM catered by the enterprises themselves. So they had their internal IT teams, took care of the OCM related activities. So yeah, that's there. But yeah, but especially in some of the other ecosystems like SAP and Oracle, fairly more mature ecosystems, we see a lot of activity on the specialist segment of OCM.
Do you categorize like business process management type of solutions or activities under that banner in terms of documenting the processes being deployed and things like that?
So the focus area for our assessments are typically in the IT services, in delivering the IT related services around consulting, implementation, managed services, and some of the other related support services. From a business process perspective, we definitely delve deeper into the kind of business process specific changes and the solutions that service providers are building. But we don't track the service business process services market as a part of our enterprise services definition.
When it comes to what you're telling customers or how you would recommend customers approach this market based on what you've been learning, what's in the newest report, do you have any sort of general guidelines that you would recommend for someone who's listening in terms of how to proceed with their own solution strategy, their own partner selection?
Yes. So I think the first thing, and that this I tell to a lot of the clients that I closely work with, in the vendor selection process, is that the way the industry has evolved over the last decade in terms of the adoption of the ERP and some of the related enterprise software. There are specific buying centers in each enterprise, right? So there is a specific buying center who is just thinking about ERP. There is another buying center who is just thinking about their CRM system and what we need to do make the system better. And the same goes for some of the other operations and related areas. Some of the leading enterprises, who has been at the forefront of the innovation curve, they have been able to overcome this siloed approach in terms of technology consumption. So I would firstly recommend enterprises to have a more holistic approach and a more process transformation driven approach rather than just a technology driven approach of adopting a specific solution. I think that's the first. So they should start thinking about what is the future of their finance function, or what is the future of their HR function, and how some of the different solutions that are available in the market can cater to their specific needs of the industry. So that's one. Second, learn from the industry peers and push your service providers to bring in that industry experience through industry specific accelerators, case studies, and the knowledge base of how some of the transformation engagements have happened for similar enterprises in the specific industry, right? In many of our interactions, we often feel that the enterprises are not pushing the service provider enough to bring in that industry expertise upfront and throughout the engagement, right? Many a times we see service provider bringing in that capability in the beginning of the engagement, where they are helping them guide some of their initial decision making. But then when we get into the process of implementation and support, that vanishes. So enterprises need to be really cognizant about having that industry expertise throughout the engagement and pushing their service partners to do that. And finally, is in terms of having holistic approach in terms of deciding the business outcomes from their enterprise application engagements. A lot of times enterprises often end up having a very grand vision around the kind of return on investments they can expect out of their specific implementation. honestly, like I haven't seen great in return over investment year on year, just from ERP or CRM specific investment. So they need to evolve the kind of business KPIs that they want to track as a part of their engagement or their modernization or transformation journey. So this can be as simple as tracking the ease of using your systems, the improvement in the employee experience, improvement in the customer experience. I think those are the KPIs that should be the center of discussion and not just the cost angle of it.
Yeah, if I had to make a prediction, based on going back to the point you made on industry in particular, I see Microsoft really pushing that, and I see the tools seem to be evolving, at least in this space, to make it, I guess, more feasible or maybe simpler to put together a sort of reusable bundle of industry specific tools, whether it's data model or whether it's apps or perhaps pre-built integrations, other sort of solution overlays, really in addition to maybe what I would consider some of the more traditional strategy consulting types of industry things where it's more slide decks and templates and spreadsheets. This is more sort of technology applied, and it seems like that's growing. I know Microsoft certainly seems to be trying to push that with its industry cloud strategy. I know other vendors have their own approach to sort of pushing their solution vendors on that, right? But it seems like it can only get stronger. I can't imagine, like in the Microsoft space, that SIs are going to not follow that guidance in the next 5 years.
Definitely, and as you said, this is not only applicable for Dynamics, right? It's applicable for some of the other ecosystems, right? The SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, and even ServiceNow as well, right? So all of them are having a very very focused industry specific approach around building their solutions. With Dynamics, specifically what I have observed is there's a strong traction, on the low code, no code side, and the things around enterprises can do with the Power Platform, which is essentially enabling enterprises to do some of the process specific transformation, which is like very very focused to our industry, very easily. So that's a very interesting trend wherein Dynamics has sort of a leeway over some of the other platform vendors. That ServiceNow is also doing a great job at it. But I think talking about industry cloud, I think Dynamics do have a good runway to cover. Likes of SAP and Oracle. They have been in the industry for so long, and the kind of knowledge they have around the industry specific processes and the expense of coverage that these vendors have. So definitely Microsoft will have a lot of area to cover, but yeah, that's definitely a strong trend.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that, when it comes back to the, like, if service providers are going to follow, Microsoft to increase the importance in those, let's say, because like you said, there's so much ground to cover there, how much sort of, management discipline is required at the service provider level with the executives in those teams to say, we are going to be disciplined, we are going to follow an industry model, internally and stick to it, right? Rather than chasing deals or trying to stay general, right? And I think they all speak to that. At least that's my observation. They all speak to how important that is because it's kind of an easy thing to say. But I don't know. Do you have any sense of how are some more disciplined executing better on an approach like that than others?
So I may not be able to, or I would not rather point out specific service providers, but in general, what I have seen is, talking about discipline in the management layer for service provider. Typically, the way service providers and the large GSIs think is what's earning them dollars is the area to invest into today. But the thing with the cloud platforms is that it has evolved at such a rapid pace over the last 3 or 4 years. So the service providers who did not think of investing into ServiceNow 3 years back, now they are just struggling to identify, okay, what is an area where we can start, right? And similarly, we expect the Dynamics 365 ecosystem also to evolve at a similar rapid pace. And if the service providers are not keeping up with the kind of innovation and the product coverage that Microsoft is increasing, they will definitely find it really really hard to cope up with Dynamics, like if they do it 2 years down the line.
Are there any really serious big bets that you're seeing from your research that any of the service providers are making that maybe surprised you or impressed you with the scale of them?
Thinking about big bets, right? So nothing came off as surprise, right? So we talked about industry, how strong the industry specific theme is. What surprised me that, even though that from a services opportunity point of view, Dynamics is not that big, but we saw a lot of service providers making very, very strong investment from an industry specific solution perspective. So that's a big bet for majority of the service providers. Second is around the kind of organizational changes that a lot of the service providers are making in order to deliver some of the enterprise application specific engagements, right? So earlier, 3-4 years back, each of the service provider used to have a specific business unit delivering a specific solution. So there used to be a SAP unit or Oracle unit operating on a standalone basis. Now, a lot of service providers are taking everything together under a bigger umbrella of enterprise application and thinking to create value from a process transformation standpoint using a combination of different platforms together. And therein, I see a strong growth driver for service providers if they have started taking this sort of a view that how can Dynamics work together with some of the other platforms that are out there. So I think those will be the two key areas.
When it comes to, I was thinking about what it would take to do this, the kind of research that goes into this report. One of the challenges that just came to my mind was listening to lots of consultants speak. And I've spent enough time talking to service providers and consultant types of people. It can get very difficult to sort of parse what they're saying versus what the reality is based on the language that they use and the expressions and the lingo. Do you find that to be a challenge in this kind of work?
Yes, definitely. And, and we have been doing it for so many years now. We understand what's practical and what's not. Everyone on some of these briefings, you have all the marketing leaders and the business leaders, and every one of them is bullish about their practice and the kind of growth they are seeing and the kind of bets they are making and how they are differentiating than others. But largely, like, we rarely see a service provider doing something drastically different than the other service providers. Most of them are moving in a similar sort of a direction. And what helps us separating the words from the actual actions is we actually ask them to showcase that through a case study or through enterprise reference, wherein we get to talk to the enterprise and understand what actually happened. From a process transformation, from a technology transformation. So that's always best. Second, also in terms of the IPs and solutions that we evaluate in this study, right? We don't just stop at the provider telling us that, okay, see, this is the kind of impact the IP will provide. We do live demos, half an hour, 1 hour long discussions around understanding various aspects of that particular IP and how it is impacting a particular part of a value chain. So that really helps us to provide that holistic understanding of like what is actually working and what is just words.
Interesting. Yeah. Great. Well, this has been a really interesting chance to catch up on someone else's observations on this market. It actually really helps in my own thinking about how some of the different themes tie together, from talent to organizational change management, industry specialization, and maybe the challenges or the opportunities that lay ahead there. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this report. We'll put up some information on where to learn more. But Abhishek, it was great getting a chance to chat with you today.
Thank you, Jason. It was a great experience for me as well. Hope to stay connected.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Abhishek Mundra for joining me today. For more information on Abhishek's work at Everest Group, I'll put a couple of links into the show notes for today. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for all of our updates. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.